Have you ever noticed that the greatest stories in sports are not just about victory, but about tragedy? The Raiders are one of the most iconic teams in football, known for toughness, for rebellion, for legends in silver and black. But behind the glory, behind the trophies and the hard-hitting highlights, lie stories that few dare to talk about. Stories of promise that ended too soon, of men who had the world at their feet only to see it slip away, of broken dreams, fragile lives, and shadows that followed players long after the cheers had faded. Tonight, we dive deep into the saddest chapters in Raiders history. From a rising star who lost everything to addiction, to a young draft pick who never even had the chance to play his first game, to a Pro Bowl center who vanished on the eve of the biggest stage in football, and even to legends whose bodies broke down after years of sacrifice, chasing strength and glory. These are not just football stories, they are human stories. Stories that will remind us that behind every helmet, behind every highlight, there is a person with struggles, with fears, with heartbreaks we may never fully understand. And as we go through this journey, you'll discover the forgotten names, the untold tragedies, and the painful truths that shaped not only the Raiders' legacy, but the fragile line between greatness and despair. So stay with us until the very end, because some of these stories are well known, while others are almost hidden in history. And by the time we're done, you'll see the Raiders, and maybe even the game of football, in a very different light. Welcome to History of Raiders. If you love stories that go beyond the scoreboard, beyond the headlines, and deep into the human side of history, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the shadows behind the silver and black.
In the late 1960s, the Oakland Raiders were building a reputation as one of the most feared teams in football. Their offense was explosive, their defense ruthless, and their swagger unmatched. At the center of that rise stood a wide receiver who could change the game in a single play, Warren Wells. Wells had the kind of speed that left defenders gasping. In 1969, he became the deep threat every quarterback dreams of. That season alone, he scored 14 touchdowns, leading the league in yards per catch. When Darryl LaMonica launched the ball downfield, fans knew exactly who was waiting at the other end. For a brief moment, Wells was unstoppable. He wasn't just good, he was electric. But behind the highlight reels, Wells was fighting battles no one could see. Alcohol became his quiet companion, and trouble soon followed. He faced repeated arrests, often tied to drinking or personal conflicts. While his teammates celebrated victories, Wells was slipping into a cycle of mistakes that would soon cost him everything. The turning point came in 1971. Legal issues combined with his off-field struggles brought his career to an abrupt halt. At only 28 years old, still in his prime, Warren Wells was gone from the game. No farewell tour, no final moment in the spotlight, just silence. Life after football was even harsher. Without the structure of the team and the glory of Sundays, Wells spiraled further. He spent time in prison, struggled to find steady ground, and drifted into obscurity. The man who once filled stadiums with cheers now lived in poverty, often forgotten even in his own city. Fans remembered the touchdowns, but the man himself became a shadow, far removed from the bright lights of the Coliseum. In the spring of 1998, the Raiders believed they had found their future on the defensive line. His name was Leon Bender. At just 22 years old, Bender was everything a coach could want. Big, fast, powerful, a mountain of a man who stood at 6'5", weighing nearly 300 pounds. He wasn't just size. He had speed that could collapse pockets, strength that could bully offensive linemen, and the kind of energy that lit up teammates around him. At Washington State University, Bender was a force. He helped lead his team to the Rose Bowl in 1998, the program's first appearance there in decades. Scouts saw him as raw but full of potential, Some believed he could become one of the anchors of the Raiders' defense for years to come. When the draft arrived, Oakland selected him in the second round. The organization was excited. His family was overjoyed. Bender himself had dreamed of this moment since childhood, and now it was real. For a kid from the tough neighborhoods of California, it was the beginning of everything he had worked for. But just weeks later, before he could even play his first professional snap, tragedy struck. On a warm June morning, Leon Bender suffered a fatal epileptic seizure inside a friend's home in Atlanta. He was only 22. The news hit the Raiders camp like a thunderbolt. Coaches, players, and staff were stunned. One moment they had been planning his future, and the next they were mourning his death. His family, who had been preparing to see him take the field in silver and black, were left with grief that words could never truly capture.
For many fans, Bender's name faded quickly from the headlines, but to those who knew him, teammates, coaches, and loved ones, his story remains a reminder of just how fragile life can be, even for the strongest among us. Barrett Robbins was the heart of the Raiders' offensive line, a Pro Bowl center, a leader, a man whose job was to anchor the chaos in front of him. By 2002, he had reached the height of his career. The Raiders were heading into Super Bowl 37, and Robbins was expected to play one of the most important games of his life. But on the night before the big game, something went terribly wrong. Teammates and coaches noticed that Robbins was missing. At first, it was confusion. Maybe he had stepped out, maybe he was running late, but hours passed, and still no one could find him. Panic began to spread. The Raiders were about to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and their starting center had simply vanished. The truth was far darker than anyone realized. Robbins was battling bipolar disorder, a condition that even he didn't fully understand at the time. While his teammates were preparing for the biggest game of their lives, Robbins was in the grip of a manic episode. He disappeared into Mexico, convinced in his altered state that the Raiders had already won the Super Bowl and that his job was finished. When he finally returned, it was too late. The coaches made the painful decision to leave him out of the game. The Raiders went on to lose badly, and the absence of their Pro Bowl center became one of the defining stories of that Super Bowl. But the saddest part was what came after. Robbins' struggles didn't end when the confetti fell. His life spiraled through years of depression, substance abuse, and repeated arrests. The same man who had once stood as a cornerstone of the Raiders' line was now fighting battles far away from the football field. Behind the headlines and the harsh criticism, there was a human being lost in an illness few people could see. When Lyle Alzado put on the silver and black, he became the kind of player every Raider fan loved. Fierce, intimidating, unstoppable when the whistle blew. He was the kind of defensive end who didn't just tackle you, he tried to break your spirit. His eyes burned with fire, and opponents knew they were in for a long day when Alzado lined up across from them. But behind that fearsome image was a man driven by something more than just love of the game. Alzado wanted to be the strongest, the toughest, the best. And for him, that meant pushing his body further than nature ever intended. He openly admitted what few dared to confess at the time. He had been using anabolic steroids for years. At a time when the subject was mostly whispers, Alzado said it plainly. He believed steroids gave him the edge. He believed they turned him into the warrior fans adored. For a while, it seemed to work. He became a star in Denver, then in Cleveland, and finally with the Raiders. With Los Angeles, he found the perfect stage for his larger-than-life personality. He won a Super Bowl ring in 1983, cementing his place in Raider lore. The fans loved him, his teammates respected him, and his legend grew. But as the years went on, his body began to pay the price. The strength that once seemed limitless faded. The warrior began to weaken. In 1991, Alzado shocked the sports world when he revealed he was dying of brain cancer. He was only 42 years old. In interviews, his voice trembled, not from fear of death, but from regret. He spoke about how the drugs he once thought were his secret weapon had become his downfall. He warned young athletes not to follow his path. By 1992, Lyle Alzado was gone. The man who had once been the fiercest Raider on the field
had become a symbol of how chasing power can destroy even the strongest among us. In 2007, the Oakland Raiders held the #1 pick in the NFL draft. The team was desperate. The glory days of the silver and black had faded. They needed a savior, someone who could bring back the fire. All eyes turned to a quarterback from LSU, Jamarcus Russell. He was massive, 6'6", over 250 pounds, with one of the strongest arms scouts had ever seen. Some said he could throw the ball 70 yards on one knee. He looked like the perfect Raider, a giant with power, a quarterback built like a lineman. Al Davis, the legendary owner, was convinced this was the future of the franchise. And so, Russell became the top pick. The expectations were enormous. But behind the flashbulbs and the handshakes, something was already wrong. The negotiations dragged on. Russell held out for more money. He missed all of training camp. When he finally joined the team, he was far behind. The game moved too fast. The pressure was too heavy. Fans wanted a superstar. Coaches wanted a leader. But Russell was still a kid from Mobile, Alabama. A quiet, private person. He never looked comfortable in the spotlight.
And then came the whispers. Was he lazy? Did he care about football? Was he eating himself out of the league? The weight issues became headlines. His body ballooned, sometimes over 300 pounds. Every mistake on the field was magnified. Every interception was proof that he wasn't the answer. But what most fans didn't know was what Russell carried off the field. Early in his career, his beloved uncle, the man who raised him like a father, passed away. The loss crushed him. Football no longer felt the same. And instead of support, Russell was met with ridicule. Inside the Raiders organization, chaos ruled. Coaches changed, systems changed, the roster was weak. The team expected Russell to be the savior, but gave him little structure. It was a toxic mix. Then came the stories of the infamous blank tapes. Coaches supposedly gave Russell tapes of game film to study. Later, they asked what he thought. He confidently said he had watched the blitz packages, but the tapes had been blank. It became the symbol of his failure. The tale spread through the league. Fair or not, his reputation was destroyed. And yet Russell still had moments. A long touchdown here, a comeback drive there. You could see the talent, the arm strength, the potential. But those glimpses were brief, fading as quickly as they appeared. The media labeled him the biggest bust in NFL history. Talk shows mocked him. Fans booed him. The same people who once called him the future now used his name as a punchline. By 2010, just 3 seasons after being drafted, Jamarcus Russell was gone, released, out of the NFL, only 25 years old. But his story didn't end with football. Without the game, the spiral deepened. His weight climbed, his confidence vanished. He tried to make comebacks, but teams wouldn't even return his calls. There were darker moments, too. Russell was arrested for possession of codeine syrup, purple drink. He insisted he never used it to get high, but the headlines did their damage. It became another scar on a reputation already shredded. Privately, Russell still grieved. His uncle's death haunted him. His family leaned on him, expecting him to be the provider. Money disappeared. Trust eroded. The world saw him as a millionaire who wasted his chance. But behind the curtain was a young man, lost and broken, with no one to guide him. Even years later, when he gave interviews, his voice carried pain. He said he wrote letters to every NFL team begging for one more chance. No one answered. He admitted that the label bust would follow him forever. The saddest part, Jamarcus Russell had the talent, the arm, the size, the ability. But talent wasn't enough. Circumstances, personal loss, and a lack of support crushed him before he ever truly had a chance. Today, when people talk about Jamarcus Russell, they talk about failure. But hidden behind the laughter and the insults is a human being who dreamed of greatness and fell harder than most could imagine. The Raiders have always carried an image of power, rebellion, and grit. But not every Raider story is about dominance on the field.
Some of the saddest moments in team history come from lives that ended far too early. These players wore silver and black with pride, but fate had other plans. Their stories remind us that football glory can be fragile, and that even the strongest can be taken away in an instant. In the late 1990s, the Raiders invested in one of the most promising defensive linemen in the league, Darrell Russell. He was drafted second overall in the 1997 NFL Draft, and it didn't take long for him to prove why. Standing at 6'5" and weighing nearly 320 pounds, Russell was a nightmare for quarterbacks. He was named to back-to-back Pro Bowls in 1998 and 1999, and many believed he was on track to become one of the greats. But Russell's journey took a dark turn. Off-the-field troubles began to overshadow his talent. In 2002, he faced multiple suspensions for violating the league's substance abuse policy. What should have been the prime years of his career slipped away as his battles with drugs consumed him. By the time he was trying to mount a comeback, the dominance that once defined him was fading. Then came December 15, 2005. Russell and a friend were driving in Los Angeles when their car lost control, crashed into a bus stop, and flipped over. The impact was devastating. Darrell Russell, only 29 years old, was gone in an instant. His death shocked the football world. Here was a man once hailed as one of the most unstoppable forces on the defensive line, gone before he could find redemption. His story is remembered as both a warning and a tragedy, a reminder of how quickly promise can vanish and how battles off the field can be as deadly as those on it.
If you followed the Raiders in the 1990s, you knew the name Chester McGlockton. Drafted in 1992, he quickly became one of the most feared defensive tackles in the NFL. At 6'3" and 335 pounds, McGlockton wasn't just a wall, he was an avalanche. He earned 4 Pro Bowl selections and terrorized offensive lines with his rare mix of power and speed. But behind the helmet and the intimidating presence, McGlockton was known as a gentle giant. Teammates often described him as soft-spoken, kind, and deeply devoted to his family. He was the kind of player who could turn into a warrior on Sunday, then a mentor or friend the moment he stepped off the field. After retiring from the NFL, McGlockton turned to coaching. He wanted to guide young athletes, helping them avoid the mistakes he had seen during his playing days. His second act in life looked as promising as his first. Then came November 30, 2011. McGlockton died suddenly from heart failure at just 42 years old. For many, it was unthinkable. He was still young, still active, still giving back. The Raiders family mourned the loss of a man who had been more than just a player. He was a leader, a role model, and a reminder that even the strongest bodies can hide unseen weaknesses. McGlockton's passing left a deep mark on his teammates and coaches. They remembered his laugh, his humility, and his relentless drive to make others better. His story is one of those that lingers, a reminder that life is never promised, even to the strongest among us. Some tragedies feel like they come straight out of a nightmare. The story of Marquise Cooper is one of them. Cooper was a linebacker who joined the Raiders in 2004, but like many players in the NFL, his career was marked by movement. He played for multiple teams, always chasing his place in the league. But beyond football, Cooper had another passion, the ocean. He loved boating and fishing, and the sea was where he found peace. On February 28, 2009, Cooper set out on a fishing trip off the coast of Florida with 3 friends, including NFL player Corey Smith. It was supposed to be a relaxing day on the water, but the weather turned. The boat was small, the waves were strong, and before long, they were in serious trouble. When the group failed to return, a massive search began. The Coast Guard scoured the waters for days. Pieces of debris were found. A single survivor was eventually rescued, but Marquise Cooper, along with 2 others, was never seen again. He was only 26 years old. The story stunned the sports world. This wasn't a career-ending injury or a predictable struggle with health. It was a freak accident. a tragedy that left families and teammates asking why. Cooper's wife and young daughter were left behind, and the Raiders community grieved a young man whose life had ended not on the field, but in the waves of the open sea. The stories of Darrell Russell, Chester McGlockton, and Marquise Cooper all carry the same weight: the loss of men who should have had so much more time. Each, in his own way, wore the silver and black. Each had a life cut short by accident, by illness, by the cruel unpredictability of fate.
When people think of the Raiders, they picture the swagger, the toughness, the legends who wore the silver and black like armor. This team built its reputation on rebellion, on playing without fear, on standing apart from the rest of the league. But as we've seen tonight, the Raiders' history isn't only about power and glory. Behind the helmets and highlight reels are fragile human beings, men with dreams, men with families, men who carried the weight of expectation, and sometimes that weight became too heavy. The stories we've explored are painful. Warren Wells, a rising star lost to addiction. Leon Bender, gone before he could even play a single snap. Barrett Robbins, battling an illness that few understood in his time. Lyle Alzado, whose body gave out after years of pushing beyond its limits. Jamarcus Russell, a young quarterback crushed under the label of failure. And others like Darrell Russell, Chester McGlockton, and Marquise Cooper, each taken in ways that still feel impossible to accept. Each story is different, but they all point to the same truth. Glory is temporary, and life is fragile. The stadium lights fade, the crowd noise disappears, but the human struggles remain. For every legend we celebrate, there are shadows that remind us of the cost of chasing greatness. And yet, remembering these stories is just as important as remembering the victories, because in their sadness they carry meaning. They remind us that athletes are more than symbols. They are people with hopes, flaws, and vulnerabilities that mirror our own. The Raiders' history shines bright, but the shadows are just as real. To ignore them would be to ignore the full story of what it means to wear silver and black. So as fans, we can honor the toughness and rebellion that define the Raiders, while also honoring the humanity of the men who gave everything for the game, even when the game gave little back in return. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the saddest stories in Raiders history. If you found meaning in these stories, stay with us for more. Subscribe to History of Raiders, where we explore not just the victories, but the untold truths that shaped the legacy of the silver and black. Because history is never just about the glory. It's also about the struggle, the heartbreak, and the lessons we carry forward.